Famous education psychologist Benjamin Bloom conducted an experiment where he compared achievement of a normal lecture student, where people are sitting in a normal lecture scenario, and when compared to mastery learning, and he found some dramatic results. He realized that mastery learning situation, every student actually has to move only to the next chapter only when one has actually mastered the previous one. In this situation, he found if you allow for this mastery, then the average student in mastering learning situation achieve the same level as the top 15% of the students in a classroom not using mastering learning, which is the normal lecture situation. And 90% of the mastery learning studies have shown positive results. To explain this mastery learning thing in a very simple way, you take an example of driving license test. Every person is first given rules to understand and comprehend. Then there is a test, and when one has mastered the rules, only then he or she is allowed to practice on road. And when this practice of road is accomplished, test is taken, and then the license is given. So these are the units which have to be mastered to move progressively from one step to other. This is a case, a live example of practical example of mastery learning. Compare this with a normal classroom setting where a chapter is taught, all students are given the instruction, and without ensuring that every student has mastered it, teacher is forced to move to the next chapter. The problem is teacher has no way to keep track of students in real time. She cannot ensure that every child masters the particular unit before moving on to the next chapter. This is a normal classroom setting that we have, and therefore learning outcomes are compromised. Now if there was a way by which students are monitored on a day-to-day basis in real time, and the mentor can see how to intervene, how to make improvement, so that every student in general masters before moving on to the next chapter or the next unit, then you are coming closer to the mastery learning kind of situation, and you'll get a better result. DynaGPT for mentors actually creates mastery learning situation where student competence is checked and feedback remediation is given to the mentor so that best results are obtained. Let's see this in more in detail. This video is to explain how mentors can use DynaGPT to improve learning outcomes in the class. For example, you have DV Asansol grade 9 cohort, and around 157 mentees or students are there in the team or the cohort. On clicking of this, it opens up the complete details. Mentees are this. On the right side, you have DynaGPT. So when I click on this, DynaGPT, the artificial intelligence, will analyze each and every student, and there are 150 mentees in this group or the students in this group, and on this analysis this AI will give us the feedback and how to remediate and see that every child improves. So let's see how it actually works. I'll click on DynaGPT. On clicking of this DynaGPT icon, one sees three menu items of personalized generative AI that we are using. First is feedback and remediation, which is actually real-time feedback, real-time insights with remediation on where the students or the mentees are struggling. DynaGPT provides precise explanations, study notes, sample subjective questions, classwork, homework questions that one can use to remediate the issues observed. The second is application examples. How a particular concept is used practically to make the understanding better is through this particular menu mentor can access and see. The third one is learning references, where on the weak concepts where students are struggling, mentors are provided with classroom demonstrations, experiments, web links, etc. I'll go one by one and explain this with practical example now. As you know, DynaGPT responses are in real time, but when you click on the first menu item, feedback and remediation, one can see all the reports, various assessments taken. But the important thing is that based on the work and the performance of all the students or the mentees in the cohort or the group, DynaGPT is telling the mentor that the students are having maximum difficulty in the concept called perfect square or square number. Now that means students are not able to understand this concept, and DynaGPT is giving an option of explaining it so that mentor can explain better in the class. So if I say ignore, it will go to the next weak concept, which in this case is things to remember in powers, and this is the next weak concept students are facing. If I click ignore, I'll come to the next one. This is the next weak concept. I ignore, it comes to the next one, and that's how I can keep going from the biggest problem area to the lesser and lesser one by one. Let us see and go back to the weakest concept which the students are facing at this point in time. It's all real time. It'll keep changing depending on the performance of the student minute to minute. So I say, okay, how should I explain this in the class? So now it is generating the best possible way to an explanation which can help students understand this concept better. For example, it says perfect square or square number is a number that can be expressed as the product of two equal integers. For example, it gives 4 is a perfect square because it can be written as 2 into 2. Similarly, 9 is a perfect square. I can give this example in the class, and I can also explain the geometrical significance when it says it can be represented as a square on a graph. So I said, okay, what should I do next? It says the students, depending on their profile, DynaGPT has noticed that they can make some key mistakes in certain areas connected to this concept called perfect square or square number. So I say, okay, please elaborate what mistakes my students can make or my mentees can make. So now it is analyzing each and every student or the mentee, and actually will list possible mistakes these people are prone to make. So it is anticipating the mistakes. So you can see, not understanding the concept of perfect square, not understanding the concept of square root, not understanding the concept relationship between perfect square and square roots. So this is very interesting. Not understanding the difference between perfect square and non-perfect square. All these mistakes my group of mentees are prone to make. This is artificial intelligence has analyzed that. So I can take precautionary measures in the class, and I can elaborate little more using this. Now it says I can create some simple questions which you can use in the class to avoid these mistakes which students might commit. So now I can say, okay, elaborate, starts creating the question, and you can see I can use this question directly and explain in the class what is the square root of 25, and then gives correct answer, gives some distractors. I can show that why 25 is not the right answer. So that's how I can directly use this as a teaching aid in the class. Now students are prone to forgetting, and therefore memory aids such as flashcards are very handy. So if I want, DynaGPT can create memory flashcards which I can either use to generate flashcards through software, or I can use a printed sheet also, and I can distribute in among my students. So these flashcards are now being prepared to help student remember which they are seem to be forgetting. Imagine focused approach, completely focused based on the profile and the performance of the students under my group. Complete personalization. It is not a general thing which is coming up or showing on your screen. The next is I can create some study notes based on the students' difficulties. So these notes are not generic like any note and like any textbook. It is based on the performance of my students in this group. The notes will be different for different groups. So I say okay, generate. So it's not generating the notes. So it has created this node. I can use this in the classroom. Now imagine I'm stuck and I don't understand this concept. So just for example's sake. So at the bottom you have solution station. I can ask this question, and system will immediately answer back based on my query. It is explained. I go back to what feedback remediation I was getting. It says I can create some thought-provoking questions, subjective questions that I can use in the class as a classwork to explain the concept better. Imagine the help mentor is getting from AI of the system. And again, it is not a generic help. It is related to those students and their difficulties which is observed in the class. So I said, okay, create subjective question. It has started creating. I can use this question in the class to explain the concept better. I can create more subjective questions, and this process can go on. I can go on to the next concept also by creating ignore, and that's how the cycle continues. Now I come back and explain you how DynaGPT gives practical examples for more explanation so that people understand the concept better. So for example, again it picks up the weakest concept of my group, which is perfect square or square number, and I want some application examples. So I say okay, create some application example for me. So now a lot of examples are generated by the system. It is asking me after this that should I create a worksheet that I can circulate in the class for classwork for remediation. Again, it is focused on the weaknesses observed for that particular group of the students or the mentees. So if I say elaborate, so it has creating a worksheet. I can simply copy paste in my Word or whatever software I'm using and can distribute. I can create more worksheets. So no load on me as a mentor. Everything is being done by DynaGPT. The third menu item is learning references. References which I can use again to further explain the weak concepts of my students. So the same concept, perfect square or square number. Now let's see the references. These are the references which I can refer while teaching, and after this it is asking me, should I create some easy experiments which I can use in the class for demo purposes so that my mentees understand the concept better. So if you press on elaborate, something very interesting happens. It creates the experiment, set of square tiles, set of non-square tiles, and then experiment is asking students to arrange the square tiles in square shapes. This is an activity which has been created. Students immediately would understand the concept of square once they start arranging square tiles and non-square tiles, all created by DynaGPT. Is asking, should I create some more experiments? So if I want, I can do it, or I can go to the next concept and I can simply ask elaborate. The cycle goes on and continues this way. So there is a constant assistance to the mentor based on the profile DynaGPT notices of the mentors working under him or her. It's all real time, is based on, so if there are top performers group, it will have a different output. If there are weak students, it will have a different output. It all depends on the group that is there in the cohort.